Before we begin, I must warn you, this is not a story of comfort. It is a descent into the forbidden truth that betrayal is not an accident, but an archetype. If you choose to listen, listen with more than ears. Listen with the part of you that already knows this. For once you enter this path, you will never look at. Now, let us begin. It begins quietly, not with violence. Betrayal announces itself in silence, the kind that chills a room, that makes the heart stumble even before the truth is known. Statistics whisper of its inevitability. Surveys reveal that nearly half of relationships collapse under the weight of betrayal, whether through infidelity, deception, or disloyalty of the soul. Yet numbers cannot capture its essence. Jung knew betrayal not as a social act, but as an archetype. It is not only what one person does to another, it is the shadow that lives within every bond, waiting for its hour to rise. Betrayal is archetypal because it is older than any story we tell. It is Judas in the garden, Brutus with the dagger, Loki weaving chaos in the halls of the gods. To Jung, the traitor was not merely a villain in myth, but a figure dwelling in the unconscious of every human being, ready to emerge when intimacy deepens too far. Every relationship carries within it the seed of its own undoing, and betrayal is the flower that blooms when shadow overwhelms. One patient described to Jung a dream that haunted her. She was walking through her home at the air thick. Every door was locked. She entered and saw her husband at a table with a stranger. They turned to her, their eyes empty, their mouths whispering words she could not hear. She awoke trembling, convinced he was unfaithful. The evidence was slight, an absent glance, a phone call unanswered, but her fear gnawed until she confronted him. In time, her suspicion proved right. His silence had already been a form of betrayal. Jung told her that her dream was not prophecy. It was her psyche revealing the presence of the archetype. The traitor was already seated at the table of her marriage, waiting to be unmasked. Modern science now confirms what Jung intuited. Neuroscience shows that betrayal activates the brain's pain centers in the same way as physical injury. Psychologists find that anticipation of betrayal, suspicion, dread, intuition, often corrodes relationships faster than the act itself. Trust is not merely emotional, it is neurological, woven into circuits of safety and attachment. When betrayal looms, the brain registers threat before reason can speak. The shadow moves first, the body trembling with warnings long before truth is revealed. Ancient traditions recognize specter. In Christianity, Judas embodies the inevitability of betrayal within even the holiest bonds. In Greek myth, the betrayal of Agamemnon by his wife Clytemnestra stains entire generations with blood. In Buddhism, the betrayal is inward. Mara tempts the seeker to betray their own awakening. In every tradition, betrayal is not simply failure of loyalty. It is the eruption of shadow into the sacred space of trust. The warning signs of betrayal, if described narratively, resemble scenes from a thriller: a smile that feels too sharp, a silence too long, a conversation that ends abruptly when you enter the room, a phone placed face down, a voice that no longer trembles. These signs are not proof, but they are omen. The psyche reads them, the traitor archetype, whispering that the end may already be on. The stages of betrayal for chilling. First, dissonance. Subtle signals that something is shifting, that intimacy is cracking. Next, suspicion, the mind searching for evidence, the heart torn between denial and dread. Then, revelation, the mask slips, the truth emerges, the wound is carved open. Finally, collapse, trust disintegrates, the relationship crumbles, the traitor takes the stage fully. Jung warned that this collapse is not only external, it is psychic. A confrontation with the shadow that dwells not only in the other, but in oneself. And betrayal does not remain private. Families fracture when loyalty is broken. Communities are poisoned when secrets are exposed. Nations collapse when leaders betray their people. Jung wrote that the traitor archetype, when unleashed collectively, manifests as corruption, treachery, collapse of trust at the highest levels. The personal wound becomes societal epidemic. The shadow of betrayal, once unleashed, knows no boundaries. What then is the protocol for survival? Jung's answer was consciousness. to see betrayal not only as an act of cruelty but as revelation, to recognize the traitor as an archetype, and thus to guard against its seduction. Consciousness as shield, might say, vigilance against silence, boundaries against manipulation, awareness against denial. For betrayal cannot be prevented entirely. It is woven into the archetype of relationship itself, but it can be faced without blindness, endured with destruction, integrated into the journey of individuation. The climax of this truth is merciless. To realize that betrayal is not an exception, but a possibility embedded in every bond, that the traitor is not only the other, it is also within us, waiting for the moment when shadow overwhelms light. Jung's hidden warning was this: the traitor is never far. To love is to risk its arrival. To trust is to invite its shadow into the room. So I ask you, in your closest bond, in your most sacred trust, can you already sense the silence where the traitor waits? The traitor never arrives openly. He does not knock on the door declaring his name. He wears a mask, the mask of loyalty, of devotion, of intimacy. Betrayal thrives not in distance, but in closeness, hidden in the very gestures meant to signal trust. Jung understood this as the paradox of the archetype. The traitor must appear faithful in order to strike. The deeper the intimacy, the stronger the disguise. A patient once told Jung about her friend, a woman radiant with pride in her husband. He sent her flowers every week, spoke words of devotion in public, praised her before strangers. He is the perfect man. Yet she also confessed to strange feelings. Moments when his eyes seemed elsewhere, when his hand felt cold, she brushed them away, ashamed of suspicion. When the truth surfaced that he had carried another life in another woman, another home, she collapsed. The betrayal was not only the act, but the years of disguise. Jung told her that her psyche had already known, that her intuition was reading the archetype. The traitor must first play the loyalist, for no shadow enters without first cloaking itself in light. Modern psychology validates this deception. Research on deception detection shows that humans are remarkably poor at recognizing lies, especially in close relationships. Neuroscience reveals that oxytocin, the so-called bonding hormone, increases trust, even when faced with evidence of deceit. The very biology that strengthens intimacy also blinds us to betrayal. Loyalty becomes the perfect camouflage for treachery. Myth and scripture knew this long before science. In the Christian story, Judas kisses Christ in the garden, the ultimate gesture of loyalty masking the ultimate betrayal. In Roman history, Brutus calls himself Caesar's son, even as he raises the dagger. In Hindu tradition, the betrayal of Karna by his allegiance to Duryodhana masks itself as duty, only to lead to destruction. The ancients told us plainly, betrayal is not an outsider's act. It comes dressed as devotion. The warning signs of disguise are subtle, cinematic in their tension, the smile that arrives too quickly, the embrace that feels staged, the words of devotion spoken too often as if rehearsed, the glance that lingers not with love, but with calculation. Each moment is not proof, but omen. They are the cracks in the mask of loyalty, glimpses of the shadow beneath. The stages of disguise unfold like a sinister play. First, performance, loyalty exaggerated, devotion displayed. Next, dissonance, subtle contradictions between word and action. Then, suspicion. The beloved feels unease, though evidence is scarce. Finally, revelation. The mask collapses, and loyalty is revealed as theater. Jung wrote that the psyche often senses before the conscious mind dares to admit it. Dreams and intuitions whispering of treachery before the curtain falls. And the archetype does not limit itself to individuals. Families are betrayed not by strangers, but by those who claim duty most loudly. Communities collapse when leaders profess loyalty while serving themselves. Nations fall to corruption, masked as patriotism, devotion to the people, disguising betrayal of trust. Jung warned that when the traitor archetype rises in the collective, it always wears the costume of loyalty. Only later does the disguise fall, revealing the ruins left behind. What then is the shield? Jung's counsel was awareness, ruthless observation of dissonance, refusal to silence suspicion, courage to confront contradiction. He urged that loyalty must be tested, not worshipped. True devotion does not fear scrutiny. False devotion demands blindness. Consciousness is the light that strips the mask from the traitor before the dagger strikes. The climax of this truth is chilling, to realize that betrayal is not heralded by distance, but by closeness, that the most dangerous gesture is not absent, but the kiss, that the traitor is not outside the circle of intimacy, but seated at its very center, smiling, promising devotion. Jung's hidden warning was this: beware the loyalty too perfect, the devotion too flawless, for in its shadow the traitor sharpens his blade. So I ask you, in the smiles that surround you, in the words of devotion you hear, are you certain you are seeing truth? Or are you already watching the mask of the traitor at work? Betrayal does not arrive as a thunderclap. It begins as a hairline crack in the glass of intimacy, so fine it is almost invisible, yet destined to spread until the whole structure shatters. Jung warned that the psyche always knows before the mind admits. The unconscious trembles at the first fracture, sending signals in dreams, in unease, in the silence between words. To ignore these fractures is to walk across ice already groaning beneath your feet. A man once came to Jung with a recurring dream. He stood in his house, and the walls began to split, long cracks spreading silently across the plaster. At first they were small, but each night they grew deeper, until finally the entire house caved in upon him. In waking life, he swore his marriage was solid, his wife was loyal, his family intact. But in the course of months, truths emerged, lies carefully hidden, secrets slowly revealed. His dream had been the psyche's prophecy, not of future events, but of fractures already present. Jung explained, "Your house is your soul, and it has already begun to collapse." Modern science supports this progression. Relationship researchers identify micro-betrayals, small acts of secrecy, avoidance, or disloyalty that corrode trust long before infidelity or treachery is revealed. Neuroscience shows that the brain registers inconsistency in partners' behavior at a subconscious level even before conscious awareness arrives. The heart rate, the stomach tightens, the body senses the fracture. Intuition whispers what reason refuses to see. Ancient wisdom foresaw these cracks. In Greek tragedy, Othello's downfall begins not with betrayal itself, but with the seed of doubt planted by Iago. In Christianity, Peter's denial of Christ is not born in one moment of treachery, but in a slow erosion of courage under pressure. In Buddhist texts, the fracture begins when the mind first clings to illusion, abandoning the clarity of truth. The ancients remind us collapse is always preceded by fracture. The warning signs of these fractures are subtle, almost cinematic in their stillness. A conversation that ends too quickly, an excuse that arrives too easily, a glance that avoids, a smile that strains, a hand that withdraws, the silence after questions, the laughter that feels forced, the absence disguised as distraction. Each fracture is small, but together they map the architecture of betrayal. The stages of fracture follow a grim rhythm. First, dissonance, the faint sense that something is not aligned, though no proof exists. Next, erosion, small acts of secrecy, silences too long, half-truth spoken. Then distortion, trust begins to bend, suspicion grows, reality feels uncertain. Finally, exposure, the fractures no longer hide. They converge into a collapse. Jung taught that these stages are archetypal, repeating across myths and history, the inevitable path from unity to ruin. And the fractures are never limited to couples. Families break under unspoken betrayals, children carrying the weight of silences never explained. Communities fracture when leaders conceal truths, cracks spreading through trust until entire systems collapse. Nations tremble when small betrayals accumulate, each corruption a fracture, until the structure of society itself falls apart. Jung believed that psychic epidemics always begin with fractures too small for most to notice, until it is too late. What defense exists? Jung's counsel was to confront the fracture before it widens, to name the silence, to expose the half-truth, to refuse the comfort of denial. He warned that betrayal thrives in shadows, in what is not spoken. To survive, one must bring fractures into the light, even at the risk of pain. For unacknowledged cracks always spread, but those faced may yet be healed. The climax of this truth is merciless. To realize that betrayal rarely erupts suddenly. It grows like ivy through the walls, slowly, silently, until the house falls in a single night. That the fractures we ignore are the warnings we most need to. Jung's hidden warning was this: every collapse announces itself early. The traitor does not arrive unannounced. He carves his message in silence in cracks too fine for the blind to. So I ask you, in the house of your most sacred bond, do you already hear the plaster? Are you standing still as the first fractures creep across the walls? Betrayal is not merely an act, it is a possession. Jung taught that when a person becomes the traitor, they are no longer only themselves. They are seized by the shadow, animated by forces older and darker than their individual story. They speak with their own mouth, yet it is an archetype that breathes through them. The betrayal that unfolds is not simply human weakness. It is myth incarnate, the eternal drama replaying itself through flesh. A man once described to Jung the moment he first loved his wife. His words were trivial, but he felt something shift inside. It was as if I stepped outside self, as if another voice guided me, calm, deliberate, certain. He began to deceive with ease, hiding letters, concealing meetings, constructing an alternate life in shadows. When Jung asked what he felt in those, the man whispered, yet beneath that power was emptiness, a hollow that grew with each line. Jung explained to him that he had been seized by an archetype, the traitor. He was no longer acting as an individual, he was possessed. Modern psychology now describes this phenomenon in chilling detail. Studies on moral disengagement show how individuals caught in betrayal reframe their actions to avoid guilt. Neuroscience reveals that repeated deception dulls the brain's empathy, reducing the sting of guilt until lying feels effortless. What begins as hesitation becomes habit, and habit becomes identity. The traitor is no longer a mask. It fuses with the face. Myth and scripture foresaw this position. In the Christian story, Judas does not act alone. The text whispers that Satan entered into him before the betrayal. In Greek myth, Clytemnestra becomes more than a woman. She becomes vengeance itself, carrying the archetype of blood betrayal. In Buddhist teaching, Mara, the deceiver, is not outside but within, possessing the mind to betray its own awakening. These stories tell us what Jung confirmed. Betrayal is not only choice, it is possession by shadow. The warning signs of possession creep in like a slow fall. The partner who lies without hesitation, their tone calm, their eyes steady. The friend whose excuses grow intricate, too polished to be kept. The colleague who smiles as they speak, while something in the air feels wrong, heavy, rehearsed. Possession does not look like rage, it looks like serenity, the calm of someone who has already surrendered to shadow. The stages of possession follow a sinister progression. First, temptation. The thought of betrayal flickers, seductive, justifiable. Next, surrender. The act is committed, and guilt is silenced. Then, doubling. Deception multiplies, stories layered upon stories until truth is drowned. Finally, fusion. The betrayer no longer pretends. They have become the traitor fully. Jung warned that at this stage, confrontation is nearly impossible. The individual has been consumed, and possession does not end with individual. Families become possessed when betrayal festers within, secrets kept across generations. Communities fall when leaders betray them, yet continue with practiced smiles, shadows animating their promise. Nations are consumed when corruption becomes systemic, when betrayal wears the mask of governance. Jung called these eruptions psychic epidemics, when entire collectives fall under possession, their souls hollowed by deceit. What then is the defense? Jung's answer was unflinching, consciousness. To see possession not only in others, but in oneself. To recognize the moment when temptation first whispers, to resist the mask before it fuses to the face. He warned that the only shield against shadow is awareness, the willingness to confront the traitor archetype in oneself before it takes, for no one is immune. The traitor waits in all of us. The climax of this truth is terrifying. To realize that betrayal is not always deliberate, that it may be the shadow speaking through us before we even recognize that those who betray are often possessed long before. Jung's hidden warning was this: when betrayal enters a bond, do not look only at the act. Look for the shadow that has already taken possession. So I ask you, when you look at the one beside you, smiling, speaking, promising, do you see them? Or do you see the shadow that already moves their lips, preparing to strike? Masks never last forever. The disguise of loyalty eventually cracks. The possession of shadow bleeds into the open. Betrayal, though born in silence, leaks into gestures, into words, into the air itself. Jung wrote that the unconscious cannot remain hidden. It reveals itself in slips of the tongue, in the sudden tremor of a hand, in dreams that whisper truths the mind refuses. The traitor believes they are concealed, but the psyche betrays the betrayer. A patient once described to Jung her unease at her partner's sudden changes. He returned home later, his stories rehearsed yet strangely hollow. His smile was too precise, his touch too distracted. She could not prove anything, but her body knew. She dreamed of standing at the edge of a frozen lake, watching cracks spread across the ice. But in time, the truth emerged, letters hidden, messages uncovered, yet the betrayal had already been lived long before it was confessed. Her intuition had felt what the mask could not hold forever. Jung told her, "The shadow always leaks. Silence cannot contain it." Modern science confirms this leakage. Psychologists studying microexpression reveal that even the most skilled liars cannot fully control their faces. Fleeting flashes of fear, contempt, or guilt surface in milliseconds. Neuroscience shows that deception increases cognitive load, straining the brain until small inconsistencies erupt. Stumbling words, misplaced details, false calm. The very act of betrayal carves fissures that eventually reveal themselves. Myth and scripture echo this inevitability. In the Christian story, Judas's guilt leaks before his end, his silver coins burning his hands until he cannot carry them. In Greek tragedy, Agamemnon's betrayal of his daughter surfaces in haunted silence long before Clytemnestra strikes him down. In Buddhism, Mara's illusions flicker, their falseness glimpsed, when the mind grows still. The lesson is universal. Betrayal cannot hide forever. The mask always leaks. The warning signs of leakage unfold like cinematic clues. The lover who avoids eye contact in moments that once demanded intimacy. The friend whose laugh arrives a second too late, forced like a broken instrument. The sudden over-explanations, the stories too polished, the kindness that feels rehearsed rather than lived. Even the scent of perfume, not their own, the faint trace of unfamiliar cologne. These are not mere details. They are omens. They are the breath of truth seeping through the cracks. The stages of this leakage progress with mounting tension. First dissonance, small inconsistency, easy to excuse. Next suspicion, unease grows, intuition sharpens, the shadow of betrayal felt more than seen. Then confrontation, tension. Jung taught that the psyche and leakage is not confined to individuals. Families harbor secrets that bleed into silence, children sensing what parents never confess. Communities cover betrayals, whispers spread, the truth seeping into rumor until it becomes undeniable. Nations conceal corruption, yet scandals surface, documents leak, truths burst forth like cracks in stone. Jung saw these eruptions not as accidents, but as the collective unconscious forcing shadow into light. What defense exists against this inevitability? Jung's answer was vigilant, to listen to unease rather than dismiss it, to trust the dream that unsettles, the silence that speaks louder than words. He warned that denial is the greatest ally of betrayal. Awareness, though painful, is the only shield. For once the shadow leaks, those who refuse to see are destroyed by the collapse that follows. The climax of this truth is merciless, to realize that betrayal cannot remain hidden, that the psyche itself will betray the betrayer, that every false smile, every rehearsed word, every silence carries the echo of the truth trying to escape. Jung's hidden warning was this: the traitor always leaves traces. To ignore them is to walk blindly into ruin. So I ask you, in the voices you trust most, in the gestures you cherish, can you already feel the truth leaking through? There comes a point when silence cannot be maintained. The fractures widen, the mask slips, The shadow leaks too far. Betrayal eventually demands confrontation. Jung believed that this stage is not merely an exchange of words, it is an archetypal event, the eruption of hidden forces into daylight. When betrayal is confronted, it is not only the betrayer who is revealed, it is the shadow in both souls, called to the surface a specter. A woman once described to Jung the night she confronted her husband. She had gathered fragments of truth, strange receipts, quiet calls, of answers, but it was not the evidence that drove her. It was the silence, the cold absence of his presence, the intuition that she stood before him in their darkened kitchen, the smell of burnt coffee lingering in the air. Her voice was calm, almost foreign. As she asked, "Who is she?" His face tightened. For a moment, silence again. Then denial, then anger, then collapse. She told Jung, "I thought I wanted the truth, but when I saw his face, I knew I had summoned something darker than truth. I had summoned the shadow." Modern psychology reveals the ferocity of confrontation. Studies show that the disclosure of betrayal activates the amygdala, the brain's fear and aggression center, flooding the body with adrenaline. Confrontation is not dialogue, it is survival. Neuroscience confirms that both betrayer and betrayed experience trauma responses in these moments: fight, flight, or freeze. Words become weapons, silence becomes suffocating, truth becomes unbearable. Ancient stories foresaw these confrontations. In Greek tragedy, Oedipus confronts the oracle's words and discovers his life is betrayal itself. In the Christian gospel, Christ confronts Judas in the garden. "Friend, do what you came for." In the Mahabharata, Arjuna confronts betrayal within his own family on the battlefield, trembling before destiny. These stories remind us confrontation is not a conversation. It is apocalypse compressed into a moment. The warning signs before confrontation are cinematic, suspenseful, the quiet gathering of evidence, the pauses before question, the eyes that linger too long on a face searching for answers. The air becomes heavy. Time slows, every sound amplified. The room feels staged, as if walls themselves are waiting to hear the truth. And then the words or shadow enters. The stages of confrontation are merciless. First, accusation. Words are spoken, the mask challenged. Next, denial. The traitor scrambles to protect the disguise. Then, escalation, anger, tears, deflections, sudden outbursts. Finally, revelation. The shadow stands naked, either through confession or collapse. Jung taught that confrontation is not only external. The betrayed must also face their own shadow. The doubts ignored, the signs dismissed, the silence endured. Confrontation summons both betrayer and betrayed to look into the same abyss. And confrontation ripples beyond the two. Families are torn as truths spill across generations. Communities fracture as secrets explode into scandal. Nations convulse when betrayal is dragged into daylight. Leaders forced to face accusations that shatter illusions of trust. Jung warned that collective confrontations are the most dangerous. They can ignite hysteria, revolutions, wars. The shadow once summoned cannot be easily contained. What defense exists? Jung's counsel was ruthless honesty, to confront with clarity, not only to accuse, but to reveal. To recognize that confrontation will destroy illusions, but illusions must die for truth to live. He urged that confrontation be endured as initiation, not avoided as catastrophe, for without it, betrayal fests until collapse consumes everything. The climax of brutal. To realize that confrontation is inevitable, that silence only delays that the moment the words are spoken, the world changes forever. Jung's hidden warning was this: when betrayal is confronted, there is no return. The bond that emerges afterward is never the same. It is either broken entirely or reforged in fire. So I ask you, when you summon the courage to speak the words that cannot be unsaid, are you ready to face not only the traitor, but the shadow in yourself that allowed him to stay hidden? After confrontation, there is silence, not the ordinary quiet of a room at rest, but the heavy silence of ruins at collapse. Betrayal leaves behind wreckage, trust reduced to rubble, intimacy turned to ash. Jung taught that betrayal is not only the act of the traitor, it is the destruction of the psychic home built between two souls. When betrayal is revealed, both live in ruins, whether they admit it or not. One patient told Jung that after discovering her partner's deception, she wandered her house as if it were every object, his chair, their bed, even the photographs on the wall, poison. She said the room smelled different, colder, as if the betrayal had soaked into the wood itself. "It is not only him I cannot look at," she whispered. "It is my entire life." Jung answered that this sensation was archetypal. Betrayal destroys not just relationships, but worlds. The home of the psyche collapses, and all that remains is rubble. Modern psychology confirms this devastation. Researchers find that betrayal trauma alters memory and identity, producing symptoms akin to post-traumatic stress, flashbacks, numbness, dissociation. Neuroscience shows that the brain processes betrayal as mortal danger, flooding the body with stress hormones that linger for months or years. The betrayed often feel not only hurt but disoriented, as if reality itself cannot be trusted. The ruins are not metaphor alone. They are neurological. Ancient stories describe these ruins vividly. After Judas's betrayal, the disciples scatter in despair, faith fractured. In Greek myth, when Medea betrays Jason, she leaves behind not only a man destroyed, but children dead, and a lineage erased. In Buddhist teachings, betrayal of truth by clinging to illusion leads to samsara, endless cycles of suffering, a ruin of spirit repeating across lifetime. Myths remind us betrayal destroys foundations, leaving nothing untouched. The warning signs of ruin are stark, cinematic. A gaze that no longer meets yours, a silence that no apology can fill, rooms that feel empty even when occupied, the weight of memories that suffocate rather than console. The betrayed move like ghosts among their own lives, breathing but no longer alive. The ruins are not outside, they are inside, carved into the soul. The stages of ruin unfold predictably. First, shock. The moment of collapse, disorientation, numbness. Next, grief, mourning not only the bond but the life imagined. Then, rage. Anger erupts, consuming, scorching what remains. Finally, emptiness, the long silence, the void where meaning once lived. Jung described this progression as descent into the underworld, the psyche stripped bare, forced to walk among ashes, and ruins spread outward. Families collapse when betrayal detonates. Children grow in fractured homes, learning silence instead of trust. Communities split when hidden treachery comes to light. Nations fall into disarray when leaders betray their people, leaving structures broken, faith shattered. Jung warned that betrayal at scale leaves civilizations wandering through ruins, repeating cycles of collapse, despair. What defense exists against these ruins? Jung's counsel was stark: endurance, to stand among the ashes and not flee, to breathe the smoke without suffocating. He urged that ruins are not only endings, but thresholds. In ruins, illusions die, and when illusions die, truth, though harsh, becomes visible. The wound, he said, is where the light enters. Consciousness transforms ruins into soil, but only if one dares to remain among them. The climax of this truth is haunting. To realize that betrayal always leaves ruins, that no bond remains untouched. Yet ruins are not nothing, the stage on which new life may one day be built. Jung's hidden warning was this: if you cannot bear the ruins, you will rebuild the same fragile house destined to fall again. Only by facing the silence of destruction can you construct something that endures. So I ask you, when you walk among the ruins of your own betrayals, do you see only ash, or do you dare to search for the first stone on which to build anew? Betrayal begins in the heart of one person, but its shadow never stays confined. It spreads. It contaminates families, communities, nations. Jung warned that the archetype of the traitor does not only haunt bedrooms and friendship, it haunts history itself. The collapse of trust between two souls mirrors the collapse of trust within entire society. The traitor, once unleashed, becomes epidemic. A patient once described to Jung a family secret revealed too late. A father, respected and admired, had built his life on deception. Two families hidden, two identities carefully maintained. When the truth surfaced, it did not wound only it shattered his children, poisoned siblings against each, left grandchildren questioning their very name. It is not his lie alone, it is the silence we all carry, the shame we inherited. Jung told him that the father was not only a man, but a vessel of the traitor archetype. And when one carries the traitor, the whole lineage. Modern psychology calls this transgenerational. Studies show that betrayal in one generation leaves psychic scars in the next, transmitted through silence, secrecy, and distorted attachment. Neuroscience confirms that chronic betrayal reshapes stress responses, wiring children for hypervigilance and What seems like a single act ripples into decades of. The traitor does not end with the betrayer. It spreads like contagion. Ancient stories echo this. In the Old Testament, the betrayal of brothers, Cain and Abel, Joseph and his kin, plants curses that reverberate through generations. In Greek myth, the betrayal of Atreus by his kin sets in motion endless cycles of blood, each generation feeding the next. In Buddhism, betrayal of the Dharma by one monk corrupts the entire Sangha, weakening the collective path. Betrayal, once seeded, blossoms across time. The warning signs of collective betrayal are ominous, cinematic. The child who grows silent at the mention of a parent's name. The family gatherings or conversations skirt around unspeakable truths. The community where whispers travel faster than facts. The nation where loyalty is demanded loudly. Corruption rots beneath. These are not isolated failures. They are symptoms of betrayal becoming systemic. The stages of collective betrayal follow a brutal order. First, infection, the act of treachery within a bond. Next, transmission, silence, denial, or complicity spread outward. Then, normalization. Betrayal becomes expected. Trust erodes across generations or institutions. Finally, collapse. The collective itself fractures, unable to hold under the weight of deception. Jung warned that psychic epidemics always move this way, from one infected soul to the body of the whole. And history bears his warning out. Empires collapse not only from enemies without, but from traitors within. Families disintegrate not only from poverty, but from silence around hidden wounds. Communities fracture when leaders betray their people, yet demand loyalty still. Nations fall when corruption becomes endemic, when betrayal is no longer the exception, but the rule. The traitor, when collective, is more destructive than any war, for wars end. Betrayal corrodes endlessly. What defense exists against such contagion? Jung's counsel was collective consciousness. To name the betrayal rather than bury it, to confront corruption even when dangerous, to shatter the silence that carries treachery across generations. He warned that where betrayal is ignored, it multiplies. Only exposure halts the epidemic. Truth, though painful, is the only antidote to collective treachery. The climax of this truth is devastating. To realize that betrayal is not private, it is a plague, that the lie whispered in one room may echo for decades in countless, that the traitor archetype, once given flesh, spreads through time and history like fire through dry grass. Jung's hidden warning was this: the traitor is never alone. He breeds more of himself in silence. So I ask you, in your family, in your community, in your nation, are you living in trust, or are you already breathing the smoke of a betrayal too vast to name? Every betrayal follows a pattern, random case. It is ritual, archetypal, predictable in its cruelty. Jung called this inevitability the law of enantiodromia, the turning of all things into their opposite. Love becomes hatred, trust becomes suspicion, loyalty becomes treachery. What begins as the highest devotion ends as the deepest collapse. A patient once described to Jung the slow unraveling of her marriage and betrayal. It did not end in one night. It ended in stages, like a play in which she knew every act but could not leave. At first, denial. She clung to illusions, pretending the shadow had not entered. Then, confrontation. The mask fell, the truth revealed, but still she stayed. Next came corrosion, arguments, silences, constant suspicion, each day dissolving what little remained. Finally, collapse. The bond shattered, not with one strike, but under the weight of years of accumulated ruin. She told Jung, the betrayal was not only in his act, it was in every day I lived inside the ruins, refusing to leave. Modern psychology confirms these stages. Betrayal trauma researchers describe predictable phases: shock, denial, confrontation, erosion, and eventual collapse. Neuroscience shows that betrayal destabilizes the brain's reward system, making attachment painful yet addictive, prolonging collapse even when escape is possible. The betrayed are bound not only by love but by trauma itself, clinging to ruins as though safety might still be found there. The collapse is therefore slow, inevitable, merciless. Ancient myths reflect the same sequence. In the story of Troy, betrayal begins with seduction, then denial, then war, then ruin, the city collapsing not in one night but after years of erosion. In Christianity, Peter's denial unfolds in 3 stages before collapse into guilt. In Buddhism, the betrayal of truth by clinging to illusion unfolds in cycles, each step drawing the soul closer to suffering until collapse brings the possibility of awakening. Myths reveal that collapse is never sudden. It is written in stages, carved into destiny. The warning signs of collapse are cinematic: suffocate, the gaze that no longer holds warmth, the meal eaten in silence, the words spoken with calculation rather than care, the absence of laughter, the presence of fear. Even the body rebels: stomachs twist, hearts race, sleep vanishes. These are not passing symptoms. They are omens of collapse, the psyche crying that the bond is already dying. The stages of collapse are relentless. First, denial, blindness, silence, the desperate attempt to hold what is already broken. Next, confrontation. Truth forces its way in, masks fall. Then erosion. Trust decays, intimacy corrodes, suspicion becomes daily air. Finally, collapse. The bond disintegrates, leaving only ruins. Jung taught that to ignore these stages is to be crushed by them. Awareness cannot stop collapse, but it can prepare the soul to survive it, and collapse spreads beyond 2 souls. Families fracture as children inherit silence and suspicion. Communities stumble when betrayal corrodes leadership and trust dissolves. Nations fall when corruption, once hidden, becomes systemic, when collapse becomes collective destiny. Jung warned that collapse, once it begins, rarely confines itself. The traitor archetype demands not only the destruction of bonds, but the unraveling of worlds. What then is the shield? Jung counseled ruthless recognition, to name each stage, to see it not as accident but as archetype, to refuse denial, to face confrontation, to endure erosion without delusion, to prepare for collapse as transformation. Collapse, he taught, is not merely ending. It is the clearing of the ground. Yet only those who face it consciously can rebuild. The climax of this truth is terrifying. To realize that every betrayal contains its own blueprint of collapse, that the ruins are already encoded in the first line, the first silence. That collapse is not an accident. It is destiny written the moment the traitor enters. Jung's hidden warning was this: when betrayal begins, collapse has already been born. The end is not possible. It is certainty. So I ask you, in your own bonds, in your own loyalties, can you already hear the script unfolding? And when the collapse comes, will you survive the ruins or be buried within them? Every betrayal ends in silence, not the soft silence of peace, but the hollow quiet of absence, the echo left when trust has died. Jung knew that betrayal was not simply an event to be endured, but a revelation. The traitor archetype, once unmasked, shows us not only who deceived us, but the shadow that dwells in all human bonds. What remains after betrayal is not merely grief. It is knowledge. Knowledge too heavy, too dark, too permanent to ever forget. A patient once told Jung of the moment after the storm. She had confronted her husband, watched the collapse, lived through the ruins, but it was the silence afterward that haunted her most. It is as if the walls themselves are. Every sound I make comes back empty. I live inside an echo. Jung told her this was the essence of betrayal's aftermath. Once the traitor has spoken, nothing is ever solid again. Life becomes resonance, shadows whispering where certainty once stood. Modern psychology describes this final echo as hypervigilance, the inability to trust again. Neuroscience shows that betrayal rewires the brain circuits of safety, heightening the amygdala, leaving the betrayed scanning every word, every gesture, for signs of danger. Even years later, the echo remains, a silence inside, a readiness for treachery, even in the absence of threat. The soul never hears silence the same way again. The ancients spoke of this echo. In Christianity, Peter's denial is followed by the sound of the rooster crowing, a sound that haunted him forever, an auditory echo of betrayal. In Greek myth, Cassandra, cursed to see betrayal and collapse before it came, lived her life surrounded by echoes no one else could hear. In Buddhism, the mind that betrays truth is haunted by samsara itself, the endless echo of suffering through lifetimes. Echoes are the shadow's final gift, the reminder that betrayal does not end when the act ends. It lingers. The warning signs of the final echo are chilling, the glance that mistrusts, the silence between lovers that feels louder than words, the heart that trembles not only in the presence of betrayal, but in its memory, a laugh that feels false, a word of devotion that tastes bitter. The echo of betrayal transforms every future sound, bending it towards suspicion. The stages of this aftermath are inevitable. First, silence, the immediate void after. Next, echo, memories replayed endlessly, each word of betrayal reverberating within. Then, mistrust, the shadow spreading, infecting new bonds, corroding intimacy. Finally, resignation, acceptance that betrayal cannot be erased, only endured. Jung taught that the echo is archetypal, not merely memory, but the voice of shadow that never fully leaves. And this echo moves beyond individual. Families haunted for generations by unspoken betrayals, the silence passed down. Communities fractured, the echo of corruption whispering through every institution. Nations scarred, citizens mistrusting every promise, every leader, every word spoken in power. Jung warned that once the traitor archetype erupts collectively, its echo can linger for centuries, shaping history with distrust. What then is the final shield? Jung counseled that the echo cannot be silenced. It must be faced. To deny it is to let it rule in secret. To confront it is to integrate it into consciousness, to accept that betrayal is part of the human condition. He urged that wholeness does not come from erasing the echo, but from carrying it with awareness, letting it remind us of shadow without letting it consume us. The climax of this truth is chilling yet profound. To realize that betrayal never truly ends, the traitor may vanish, the relationship may collapse, the ruins may be rebuilt, but the echo remains. It whispers in silence, a reminder of the shadow that walks beside love, beside trust, beside every human bond. Jung's final warning was this: the traitor is not only in the other. The traitor is here, within, in the shadow that follows us all. So I leave you with this final question. When silence surrounds you, when trust feels fragile, when echoes rise in the night, do you hear only memory, or do you hear the traitor still whispering in the dark?